My parents sold my general grandfather's military keepsake for $90,000. For my sister's Tesla, I didn't find out my parents had sold my grandfather's military keepsakes in some quiet, reasonable way. I found out while standing in my childhood home, staring at an empty display case, while my younger sister's brand new Tesla gleamed in the driveway like a trophy no one had earned. When my grandmother finally heard what they'd done, how they'd sold the one thing my grandfather left specifically for me, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just smiled and said very softly, "That keepsake." The color drained from my parents' faces before she even finished the sentence. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked through the front door. You can feel it when a house has been rearranged without your permission. The air sits differently. Sounds echo where they shouldn't. Even the smell had changed, less like old wood and furniture polish, and more like something scrubbed too clean, as if someone wanted to erase evidence. I had just come home on leave. It wasn't the celebratory kind with banners and a roast in the oven. It was the practical kind, a few days between rotations to sleep in a real bed and remember what silence sounded like without boots marching through it. My duffel bag was still slung over my shoulder when I noticed it. The display case stood against the far wall of the living room, exactly where it had been since my grandfather moved in with us years ago. Except now, it was empty. The glass was too clean, no fingerprints, no dust outlines, just a hollow space. My chest tightened with that sharp, immediate dread you feel seconds before an impact. I stepped closer. Gone were the medals, each labeled in my grandfather's precise handwriting. Gone was the ceremonial dagger he'd been awarded as a general, its leather hilt worn smooth by time. And gone, most importantly, was the handwritten letter he'd tucked behind the frame, addressed to me. I set my bag down slowly. "Mom," I called. No answer. Instead, I heard my sister's bright, carefree laugh from outside. I turned to the window. A glossy black Tesla sat in the driveway, sunlight sliding across its surface. The temporary tags were still on it. My sister stood beside it, phone raised, angling for the perfect shot. She flipped her hair and smiled, looking like she'd parked her happiness right on top of someone else's history. I felt a disciplined stillness settle over me, the kind the military trains into your bones to keep you functioning when panic would be easier. I stepped outside. "Oh," she said, her smile flickering. "You're home. Where's Grandpa's display?" I asked. She blinked. "The case. Ask Mom." Inside, I found my parents in the kitchen. My mother was stirring coffee as if the world hadn't shifted. My father was scrolling on his tablet. "Where is it?" I asked. My mother sighed. "Can you at least say hello? Where is Grandpa's keepsake?" My father didn't look up. "We took care of it." The phrase hit me harder than a confession. "Took care of it how?" "You're being dramatic," my mother said, setting her spoon down. "You sold it," I said. It wasn't a question. Silence. My father finally looked up. "Yes. The medals, the dagger, the letter. Everything?" "It was valuable," my mother said quickly. "And it was just sitting there." "It was his," I replied, "and he left it to me." My sister wandered in, keys jingling. "It's not like you were using it. You're never here." "I'm serving," I snapped. She rolled her eyes. "You get paid for that." My father cleared his throat. "We're family. What he left belongs to all of us." "No," I said, my voice dropping low. He was very clear. "He didn't need it anymore," my mother added, her expression hardening. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "We didn't want to burden you," my father said. "No," I countered. "You didn't want me to stop you." My mother pointed toward the window. "Your sister needed a reliable car. Something safe. Something modern." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "So you bought her a Tesla?" I looked back at the empty wall and realized they hadn't just sold an object. They'd sold the proof that someone in this family had believed in me. I didn't yell. I just picked up my bag. "Don't tell your grandmother," my mother said sharply as I headed for the door. She doesn't need the stress. I paused at the door. She deserves the truth. The next morning, I drove to my grandmother's apartment. She was sitting by the window, a book in her lap. She looked up and said, "You look like your grandfather did when he knew someone had crossed a line." "They sold it," I told her. "Everything. For almost $90,000. She didn't gasp. She just took a slow, steady breath. "And what did they buy?" "A Tesla. For my sister." That's when she smiled, that knowing, dangerous curve of the mouth. "Well," she said quietly, "that explains the hurry." "You're not angry?" I asked. "Anger is loud," she said, looking over her glasses. "It tells people what you plan to do. I prefer silence." She stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a thin folder. "Your grandfather didn't trust assumptions. He trusted documentation." Inside were photographs of every piece, appraisals, insurance forms, and a copy of his will. A section was highlighted in clean strokes, a specific bequest of the collection to me. "They had no right," I whispered. "No," she said. "They did not. Now, we let them believe they've won. I'll need the buyer's information." "I don't have it." She smiled again. "We will. Your grandfather always said the most dangerous officer in the room is the one who doesn't raise his voice." As I stood to leave, she squeezed my hand. "Go back to your life. Do your job. Don't argue, don't explain, and don't warn them. And when they invite you over to celebrate that car, you come." "Why?" Her eyes were sharp and unwavering. "Because some lessons require witnesses." Weeks passed. I followed her instructions to the letter. Silence, I realized, was a form of discipline. My sister's social media was a non-stop parade of Tesla photos with captions like, "Hard work pays off." My parents commented with heart emojis. Not once did they mention Grandpa. About 4 weeks later, my mother texted, "We're having people over this weekend. A little get-together. You should come." No apology. Just an invitation wrapped in normalcy. I replied, "I'll be there." The call from my grandmother came the next morning. "They've planned a party," she said. "They think it's about the car. I've invited a few people as well." "Friends of yours?" I asked. "Of sorts," she replied. "Bring your uniform." The drive home felt heavy, not because I was anxious, but because I knew the silence was about to end. Anxiety requires uncertainty. This felt like standing at the edge of a controlled demolition, watching professionals set charges with steady, careful hands. When I pulled up to my parents' house, everything felt different. Cars lined the street, laughter drifted from the backyard, and the music was just a bit too loud, the kind of performative cheer meant to announce success to anyone within earshot. There it was, the Tesla, washed to a shine so bright it was painful to look at. A red ribbon was tied to the side mirror, ridiculous and celebratory. I stood there for a moment, keys in hand. I thought about my grandfather's funeral, the way the folded flag had been placed into my grandmother's arms, and how she had thanked the officer, her voice steady even as her hands shook. I squared my shoulders and walked in. The backyard looked like a catalogue. String lights, a grill going full blast, and neighbors I barely recognized holding drinks like they were at a victory lap. My sister spotted me first. She glanced at my uniform and smirked. "You really wore that?" "Yes," I said. She laughed. "Relax. It's just a party." My parents joined us moments later. My mother hugged me stiffly, careful not to wrinkle my uniform. My father clapped me on the shoulder, proud of the image I projected, if not the substance. "We're glad you could make it," my mother said. "We didn't know if you'd be free." I looked past her at the car. "Seems like an important occasion." My sister beamed. "Isn't it?" Compliments flowed, and the conversation stayed shallow. People asked about my job but lost interest halfway through the answer. They asked my sister about the Tesla, and she rattled off features with rehearsed enthusiasm. I stayed quiet. Then the gate opened. I heard it before I saw it. The subtle shift in the air, the way the laughter stuttered and thinned. My grandmother walked in, wearing a pale blouse and dark slacks, her posture perfectly straight. Beside her was a man in a tailored suit carrying a slim leather folder. Behind them was a family friend from my grandfather's military days. My mother's face drained of color. "Mom," she said, stepping forward quickly. "You should have told us you were coming." My grandmother smiled pleasantly. "I was invited." She looked at me, and a quiet acknowledgement passed between us. My father cleared his throat. "What's this about?" "A celebration, apparently," my grandmother replied, gesturing to the yard. The man beside her stepped forward but didn't speak. The music kept playing for a few seconds too long before someone finally reached for the speaker and killed it. The party didn't just end. It stopped breathing. "Mom," my mother said, her tone tight. "Let's go inside. It's noisy out here." "I won't be long," my grandmother replied. "This isn't appropriate," my father added, glancing at the guests. "Appropriate is an interesting word," my grandmother said, considering the circumstances. My sister crossed her arms. "Grandma, you're making this awkward." My grandmother looked at her, really looked at her, not with anger, but with total clarity. "Awkward? Is that what you think this is?" The lawyer opened his folder. The sound of paper sliding free was quiet, but in that silence, it sounded like a gavel hitting a desk. "I won't read everything aloud," my grandmother said, her voice carrying easily. "But I will say this. The military keepsakes your father left behind were not family heirlooms for you to distribute as you saw fit. It was a specific bequest, documented, appraised, and placed into a trust with one clear beneficiary." She turned to me. "My granddaughter." The attention shifted instantly. My father shook his head. "That's not how we understood it." "Understanding is not the same as ownership," my grandmother replied. The lawyer stepped in. "The items were sold without legal authority. The buyer has been notified that the sale is under dispute." My sister laughed nervously. "This is insane." "Is it?" my grandmother asked. My mother's hands were trembling. "We didn't know about any trust." "That," my grandmother said calmly, "was intentional." The words settled like dust. "You planned this?" my father asked, disbelief creeping in. "I prepared," my grandmother corrected. "Your father taught me to." The funds from that sale were used to purchase a vehicle, which means that vehicle is now part of the legal dispute. My sister's face went white. "You can't take my car." My grandmother's gaze sharpened. "It was never yours." The lawyer extended a document to my parents. "Notice of intent. You'll be receiving formal paperwork within the week." My father wouldn't touch it. My mother took it, then dropped it as if it burned. "This is cruel," she whispered. "No," my grandmother said softly. "This is consequence." I felt a new steadiness in my spine. It wasn't triumph or revenge. It was alignment. I stepped forward. "My grandfather didn't leave me those keepsakes because I'm special," I said. "He left them because he trusted me to protect what they stood for." "You're never even here," my sister spat. "I'm serving," I replied. And I didn't think that meant I had to guard my inheritance from my own family. The guests were already planning their exits. Drinks were abandoned. Goodbyes were mumbled. The party dissolved into embarrassed movement. As the yard emptied, my grandmother turned to me. "It's in motion now." "Thank you," I said. She squeezed my hand. "You didn't ask me to do this." "No. You chose to." She smiled. "Exactly." Behind us, my parents stood frozen in the wreckage of their own choices. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. The consequences arrived one by one. 2 days later, my mother called. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm at work," I replied. "Is someone hurt?" No. Then it can wait. They're saying we have to pay it back, she whispered, her voice rising with panic. The buyer is furious. He says the sale wasn't clean. We don't have that money, we already spent it. I thought of the Tesla and the red ribbon. I'm sorry, I said. That sounds difficult. How can you say that? Because this isn't happening to you, I replied. It's happening because of you. My sister called next, screaming that I had sicked grandma on them. Do you know how humiliating this is? She sobbed. Yes, I said quietly. I'm watching you learn. 3 days later, the keepsake came home. A courier delivered it in a reinforced case. My grandmother and I opened it together on her dining table. The medals caught the light. The dagger's edge was still pristine. And then there was the letter. If you're reading this, it began, it means you didn't flinch when it mattered. He wrote about service, integrity, and how family isn't just defined by blood, but by who respects what you've earned. The legal fallout was swift. My parents scrambled, emptied accounts, and called in favors, but it wasn't enough. The Tesla disappeared from the driveway one gray morning. No ribbon, no photos. Just an empty space where my sister's certainty used to be. My father came by my grandmother's place that afternoon. He looked smaller, older. You didn't have to let it go this far, he said to me. My grandmother met his gaze before I could. You didn't have to steal from your own child. She is a soldier, and you treated her legacy like spare change. He left without another word. The house I grew up in doesn't feel the same anymore. My sister moved out. My parents followed soon after. When the dust finally settled, the silence felt different. It felt earned. I mounted the display in my own home, not to show it off, but to live with it. It's a reminder that what we inherit isn't always meant to be shared. Sometimes, it's meant to be protected. Sometimes, the strongest response isn't a confrontation. It's simply letting the truth finish what it started. Once the noise faded, all that remained was the paperwork. That's the part people don't mention when they imagine justice. They picture shouting, dramatic exits, and slammed doors. They don't picture emails with subject lines like, formal demand, or envelopes marked, certified mail. They don't picture the signatures and deadlines that make everything real. My grandmother handled it all with the same calm precision she brought to the party. She didn't gloat or lecture. She just reviewed documents at her kitchen table every morning, her pen moving steadily, as if this were just another task on a sensible list. I watched her one afternoon as she organized the papers into neat piles. One for the buyer, one for the bank, and one for my parents. She slid the last pile into a folder and closed it with finality. They're going to be very tired soon, she said. I understood what she meant a week later when my mother showed up at my door. I barely recognized her. Her hair was pulled back hastily, and her eyes were rimmed with red, not from crying, but from the exhaustion that sets in when your usual tools stop working. I just need a minute, she said, stepping inside. She sat on the edge of my couch as if she weren't sure she deserved the space. We're losing the house, she said, the words bare and unadorned. I waited. They say the repayment has to be made in full, she continued, her voice trembling. The accounts we used. They were flagged. Everything is frozen until it's resolved. That's what happens when money changes hands illegally, I replied. She flinched. We didn't know. You didn't ask. Her voice broke slightly. Your sister is blaming us. I almost smiled. And Dad? I asked. He's angry at everyone, she whispered. Mostly himself. There it was, the part of the story I'd been waiting for. Regret. But it wasn't regret for what they'd done to me or for ignoring my grandfather's wishes. It was regret for miscalculating the cost. You could tell your grandmother to stop, my mother said quietly. She'd listen to you. I met her gaze. No, she wouldn't. And even if she did, I wouldn't ask her to. Her shoulders sagged. I raised you better than this, she said weakly. I stood up. You raised me to respect what doesn't belong to me." She left without saying goodbye. The next casualty was my sister's certainty. She called late one night, her voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "They're taking everything," she snapped. "Do you know what that feels like?" "Yes," I answered. "I do." She was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't think it would begin like that," I said. The call ended there, two people realizing they would never be on the same side again. A month later, the house was empty. The home I'd grown up in, the one my grandfather lived in, the one my parents treated like a guarantee, was gone. My grandmother walked through it one last time with me. She ran her fingers along the banister and paused in the living room, glancing at the blank space where the display case had once stood. "Funny," she said softly. "They cleared out everything but the truth." That evening, she handed me a final folder. "I've updated the trust. It's all protected now. No one can touch it without your consent." I scanned the pages, seeing my name appear again and again. "I didn't ask for this," I said. She smiled gently. "Your grandfather didn't ask to be honored, either. He earned it." I thought about the months I'd spent trying to stay small to keep the peace. How often I'd swallowed my anger because it felt easier than conflict. Then I thought about the quiet weight of the medals now resting safely in my own home. Some families survive by pretending. Mine survived by being exposed. In that exposure, I stopped apologizing for taking up space. The first night I slept in my own place with the keepsakes properly displayed, I didn't turn on a single light. The room was dim, lit only by the street lamps outside. The medals rested in a simple frame, the ceremonial dagger lay beneath them, and his letter was tucked safely behind the glass. For the first time since he died, I felt like I'd brought him home. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. No raised voices, no guilt disguised as concern, no expectation to make myself smaller. Just stillness. My grandmother visited the next day. She studied the wall, nodded once, and said, "He would approve." We sat at my kitchen table with tea that went cold while we talked about nothing urgent. The weather, a neighbor's dog, a boring book. Eventually, she mentioned, "Your parents are asking around about whether you're angry." "I'm not," I said. "Honestly, I'm just done." She gave me a soft smile. That's usually when people finally understand the damage they caused. "Do you think they will?" I asked. "They'll understand the loss," she considered. "Whether they understand why is another matter." My sister sent one last message a week later. It was short. "I didn't know it would end like this." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Neither did Grandpa. That's why he planned." She never answered, and I didn't feel the urge to chase her. Life moved on. I went back to duty, to the early mornings and the comfort of structure. But something inside me had shifted. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. I stopped softening my words to make others comfortable. I stopped believing that loyalty meant surrender. When I think about my parents now, it isn't with anger. It's with distance, the kind that lets you see a pattern clearly once you're no longer trapped inside it. They hadn't stolen from me because they hated me. They'd stolen because they believed I would endure it. They were right about my strength, but they were wrong about my silence. Months later, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph I hadn't seen in years. My grandfather, young and in uniform, standing beside my grandmother. They were looking straight at the camera. Not smiling, not posing, just certain. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, were 4 words. "You did not flinch." I framed the photo and placed it beside the medals. Not as a shrine, but as a reminder. A reminder that honor doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room, that family doesn't get to redefine your worth, and that sometimes, the greatest act of revenge isn't destruction, it's preservation.